What's going on, Shield Brothers and Shield Maidens? This is True for Shield Rest, and today I want to talk about traps in Daggerheart. So let's get into it. Alright, so the main reason why I want to talk about traps in Daggerheart today is because it is something that is not really talked about in Daggerheart. And for our newer GMs, you may not fully understand how to design and create a trap, especially in Daggerheart. So that's why I want to help you out today. So let's get into how you design traps, and then basically we'll get into a quick little construction of one. So you can see what I'm talking about. So that way you might be able to even pull something as simple as this particular trap into your game if you so chose. So there are 5 design elements in which I utilize to create my traps. The first one being tiers. I love tiered play just in general, but in this particular case, I use tiers to tell me how difficult or how easy are these traps going to be. Because if I'm dealing with a tiered 1 trap, then I know it's a pretty easy trap and I don't need to create large DCs and big amounts of damage through this tier 1 trap. But if it's a tier 4 trap, however, that allows me to understand that this is going to be a beefy trap and something that is probably going to be pretty intricate and rather difficult for my players to deal with, assuming that they notice it in the first place. And then we get into the activation, which is going to be the thing that just starts this whole thing up. What activates this trap? That's what we want to know. That's what this is primarily for. Is it a tripwire? Is it a stone of some kind? What are we talking about? And then we get into the effect. The effect is obviously what the trap actually is. So is it poison cloud? Is it a big explosion? Is it going to be crossbow bolts? What are we talking about here with the effect? And that's going to be where you start bringing in the damage, any DCs that the players have to make in order to avoid the darn thing. Whatever it is, that's what this is going to be. It's going to be your effect. Then we're going to get into, are there any possible countdowns that we can throw in here? Are you going to use it? Is it applicable in any way, shape, or form for a countdown for this? Is it going to be like when they step on this or do the tripwire that all of a sudden we have this countdown that starts and then ticking time bomb, who knows? You know, that sort of situation. Then we get to nullify. Nullify is mainly for the players to be able to notice and then subsequently disarm the trap. Now, you may not want to go to these lengths within Daggerheart in particular. This may be more of a D&D thing that I'm kind of bringing over into Daggerheart because I do like having some structure to my traps in particular. However, you may keep it a little bit more loose because you do not have to go to this level when it comes to your trap design. You can just really look at what effect do you want and then what's the activation, and you can keep it pretty loose. This just helps me because I like a little bit more of a structure in my own head. So that way when I'm looking at the overall game and the encounter in which these players are in currently, especially if it's a dungeon crawl of some kind, what kind of traps are out there and how could the players possibly notice or deal with it? It helps me to streamline the process for them by creating structure for me. It allows me to understand what kind of DCs would be necessary in the moment without really having to put that much thought into it right then and there, especially if I do it on the front end. So that's why I typically go through this particular design process rather than keeping it always loose and just free-flowing in that aspect, because then it feels too haphazard and too improv rather than intended and, let's face it, necessary. Now let's get into the design of a trap. We're going to go ahead and make this a tier 1 trap because I want this to be basically 2 crossbow bolts that are centered on a point that when the players do hit that tripwire, it fires automatically. And that actually already solves a few of our design elements, right? We know our tier, it's going to be tier 1. We know what the activation is, a tripwire, too easy. We know what the effect is, which is going to be the crossbow bolts. But now what we need to flesh out here within the effect is it going to be a DC situation where it's a reaction roll? Or is it going to be an attack roll? Are we going to actually roll for the crossbows to penetrate the player that's involved here, right? Or are we going to go ahead and make it a DC, insert whatever number here for the reaction roll? I'm going to go with the reaction roll because it keeps the players on their toes now all of a sudden, especially with that agility reaction roll that's going to be necessary. And we're going to go ahead and make this a DC 15 because this is all of a sudden happening. So they really do need to be ready for it. So a reaction roll makes a lot of sense. Now, the damage here is where we get to have a little bit more leeway in how damaging do we want this to be? How severe, major, or minor do we want this to be for our players? Now, It depends on obviously the context, but we're going to just say that this is an old dusty dungeon in which these players are running through, and it's a tier 1 dungeon, so we're going to have some tier 1 traps. And with that being said, we're going to go ahead and say that these crossbows are going to be a little older. Maybe the string's not as taut as it once was. Maybe the shafts themselves are not nearly as strong and able, and they're a little bit more fragile than they used to be. Age, time, whatever you want to look at, it's just gotten to these things, and so even humidity, all that good stuff, plenty of factors, doesn't matter why, it just is the way that it is. But sometimes having those little design elements in the back of your mind helps you to describe this to the player, especially if you have a player that's like, I want to investigate, why did this just snap so easily? Why did this do basically no damage? That kind of thing. Whatever the case is, you're going to sometimes have those very curious players, so it helps to have this just in the back of your mind. So, with that being said, we're going to go ahead and make this major damage for these crossbow bolts. They're not super strong, but they're also not nothing either. They're not a no-threat situation here. And what we can actually do is we can change up how much damage they actually do by flitting between the top line in Chapter 6 for Tier 1 of what kind of damage we want to do. We can flip between major, we can flip between severe and even minor damage if we really wanted to. I mean, you could even take this to minor damage and be perfectly fine there as well, and make it like a 1d6 plus 1 situation. No problems at all. It's really whatever you feel is necessary, but that's the effect that we're looking for, so we're going to go for major damage with this first one, because then it really sinks into the players that this is not going to be an easy one. So, love that. So that's our effect in its entirety. Now, what we can then do is go ahead and look at, do we want this to be a countdown? Is this something where the crossbows reload? Is there a mechanism in which they reload? Let's say that they do, and let's say that it's just well designed enough that they actually do reload after a little bit of time. Maybe there's some sort of mechanical something that is actually back there reloading them, or maybe there are like goblins in the back that are kind of maintaining the traps and keeping them all orderly. I don't know. Insert whatever reason here. I'm just doing a countdown just cuz. And so we're going to go ahead and make this a loop countdown of 1d6. So that way it's randomized when this thing actually gets done. So it's just going to take a little bit of time, nothing too crazy, and it just kind of depends. So if the players keep moving, though, they don't have to worry about this trap and when it gets reloaded. However, when they come back, that's a different story. So that makes it a little bit more fun. But again, you probably don't need a countdown with this one in particular. So for the nullify portion of the design phase, we want to go ahead and think about how easy is this to recognize? Are they going to be able to see that tripwire pretty easily? And I would say yes. DC 10 instinct check is perfectly fine. Not a reaction roll, mind you. Just a normal check is perfectly fine for them to recognize that, oh, hey, there's a tripwire there. Maybe don't go over that. So they can go ahead and deal with that possibly. And that's where the second part of this is going to come into play, where we now have a finesse check that is going to be needed to disarm this thing. So in order to do so, you could make it a DC 10, fairly easy check for them to deal with. But if they don't have any tools, what you can do, and I would say that'd be if they had tools, but if they don't have any tools, go ahead and make that a DC 15. Just to show that there's a little bit of gradient here, that if they had the tools, it would be a lot easier for them to deal with. It's really all you're stating with this, but also really drives home the point that this is going to take some time for them to deal with without the tools, without that very fine motor skills that are necessary when it comes to disarming such traps. So that's really all you have to do, though, and that takes no time at all. And really and truly, when it comes to the game moments, those little situations in which they would see that, you're just describing the fact that there's a tripwire. Would they see the crossbows? Probably not. There's probably like a form of a hole in a wall that there's going to shoot through and at an angle. And they might not notice it right away. So really and truly, it's a good way to show them like, oh, hey, there is something here. But then you don't even have to describe the rest of it if they nullify it, if they actually disarm it, or if they find a way to get around it. Now, with tripwires, obviously, you just step over it, right? Like it ain't that difficult. But again, there's plenty of other ways to go about this, and maybe the tripwire was set up as a decoy. Who cares? You don't have to go to that level, but it's fun to just kind of mess around with your players every now and again. But I hope you can see how easy this design process really and truly is, and how it's meant to help you and not hinder you. It's supposed to help you in the moment, so that way you already know in the back of your mind you have this whole structure. but you may not actually need it, but it's going to help you describe it to your players that much more simply and succinctly so that way they understand what exactly is going on and what they're looking at, and you're prepared for when they decide to make certain decisions, whether those be good or bad. But if you're new to the channel, we are a group of friends and military members that absolutely love tabletop RPGs, and we believe that no matter what system you play, you should have enough content to be able to create an epic game night every night. So if you like Daggerheart, DC-20, Lancer, World of Darkness, Genesis, and even D&D, we'll be the channel for you because we're going to keep bringing all this content. We're putting out about 3 videos every single week. So if you're interested in any of that, consider subscribing and hitting that bell notification so you don't miss a single one of those videos. So until the next one, keep that shield wall strong.